It was an ordinary December morning in Manhattan. Busy streets, honking taxis, and the crisp chill of winter in the air. But in the midst of the city's endless hustle, something unthinkable was about to happen. At 8:45 a.m., outside a luxury hotel just blocks from Wall Street, a single gunshot rang out. Pedestrians froze, cars screeched to a halt, people looked around, confused, unsure of what they'd just heard. And there, lying on the sidewalk, was Brian Thompson, one of the wealthiest and most powerful executives in the healthcare industry. Blood pooled around him as the chaos unfolded. But this wasn't a random act of violence. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a hit from the mob. No, this was something far more calculated, far more personal. The police would later discover that the man behind this cold-blooded murder wasn't a career criminal or a hardened killer. A 26-year-old Ivy League graduate with no prior criminal history. A young man with a promising future and a spotless record had just assassinated one of corporate America's most influential figures. In broad daylight. Why did he do it? What could drive someone who had everything, wealth, brains, and opportunity, to throw it all away in a single moment of violence? This is the chilling story of Luigi Mangione, the Ivy League graduate who became an unlikely murderer, sparking a national conversation about power, greed, and justice. Stay with us as we uncover the shocking details of this real-life crime that left an entire nation stunned. December 4th, 2024, started like any other day in New York City. The streets were alive with the usual chaos, car horns blaring, bustling commuters rushing to their offices, the hum of the world's most famous city in full swing. But for Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare and one of the wealthiest figures in the healthcare industry, this day would not be like any other. At 8:45 a.m., just moments after stepping out of the luxurious Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, a single gunshot shattered the city's rhythm. Witnesses watched in horror as Thompson collapsed on the sidewalk, blood spreading across the concrete beneath him. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but it was already too late. The man who had overseen billions of dollars in healthcare operations was gone in an instant. The crime was as shocking as it was tragic, but what truly stunned the public and the authorities was the person behind the murder. Luigi Mangione, a 26-year-old Ivy League graduate, was the last person anyone would have suspected. He had no criminal record, no prior history of violence, and no apparent connection to the victim. On paper, Mangione was the kind of young man parents dreamed of raising. He was a brilliant data engineer, a graduate of the prestigious University of Pennsylvania, and someone who seemed destined for a life of success. But beneath his polished exterior lay something far darker, a deep resentment, an all-consuming anger, and a plan that would shake the foundations of corporate America. Who was Luigi Mangione? What could possibly have driven a man with so much promise to commit such a desperate and violent act? And how did this murder, carried out in broad daylight on one of the busiest streets in the world, expose the hidden cracks in America's healthcare system? This is the story of ambition turned to anger, privilege turned to protest, and a man who went from a rising star to a cold-blooded killer. To understand this tragedy, we must first understand the forces that shaped both the killer and his victim, and the events that brought their lives tragically together. From Haiti to the mysterious pond, from slaughtering birds to the dragon that was inside us. Luigi Mangione wasn't someone you'd ever expect to see on the front page of newspapers, let alone in connection with a murder. Born and raised in Maryland, Luigi came from a life of privilege and opportunity. His parents, well-off professionals, made sure he had access to the finest education and resources. From a young age, Luigi stood out. He wasn't just smart, he was brilliant. At Gilman School, one of the most prestigious private schools in Maryland, he excelled academically and socially. Teachers described him as bright, driven, and destined for success. His peers admired his quick wit and his ability to grasp complex ideas effortlessly. But beneath the surface of his polished exterior, there were hints of something deeper, something darker. Luigi's drive didn't stop in high school. He earned himself a place at the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League institution known for producing some of the world's brightest minds. At Penn, Luigi majored in computer science and data engineering, fields that perfectly matched his technical brilliance and analytical mind. To those around him, he seemed like the perfect student, hard-working, intelligent, and ambitious. After graduating, Luigi quickly secured a lucrative job as a data engineer, working on cutting-edge projects in the tech world. By all accounts, his career was thriving. He had the kind of job that many would envy, one that promised stability, wealth, and prestige. But Luigi wasn't just about work. Outside of his professional life, he had a passion for fitness and healthy living. He spent hours researching nutrition, experimenting with different diets, and perfecting his workout routines. Friends said he was obsessed with optimization, whether it was his body, his work, or his life in general. On the surface, Luigi Mangione seemed like someone who had it all: intelligence, wealth, and a promising future. He was the kind of person parents would point to as a role model for their children. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind Luigi's calm and composed demeanor, there was a growing storm. Those closest to him noticed subtle changes in his behavior over time. He grew quieter, more withdrawn. Friends described him as intense, saying that he often fixated on injustices and problems in society that others might brush off. And then there was his anger, an anger that seemed to simmer beneath the surface. Luigi became increasingly vocal about his frustrations with corporate greed, particularly in the healthcare industry. He saw it as a system designed to profit off the suffering of ordinary people, a system that put profits over lives. His warnings increased, and eventually, the destruction of the system finally carried him away. At first, his rants seemed like harmless complaints, a young man venting about the world's flaws, but over time, that frustration turned into something much darker. Luigi Mangione, the gifted Ivy League graduate who seemed destined for greatness, was now walking a path that no one could have predicted. A path that would lead him to commit a crime so shocking, so calculated, that it would leave an entire nation asking, how did it all go so wrong? December 4th, 2024, dawned clear and cold in New York City. The streets were bustling with energy as people hurried to their jobs, unaware that a violent act was about to unfold. At 8:45 a.m., Brian Thompson, the esteemed CEO of United Healthcare, emerged from the Hilton Hotel. He was dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his confident stride reflecting his high status in the corporate world. But this was a morning unlike any other. As he stepped onto the busy sidewalk, he had no idea that he had just become the target of a meticulously planned assassination. A month earlier, he would have been out and about in Paris on his way to come see him. He'd taken his usual route to work, but this morning, he'd disengaged his mind and flown without stopping in the sky at first light. In the shadows nearby, Luigi Mangione waited. He had a chilling determination in his eyes. This was the moment he had prepared for, a moment that would change everything. As Thompson approached his car, Luigi pulled out his weapon, a 3D-printed ghost gun, equipped with a suppressor. This was no ordinary firearm. Ghost guns are untraceable, homemade weapons that can be assembled without serial numbers, making them virtually invisible to law enforcement. With his heart racing, Luigi took aim. As the cold December wind swirled around him, he pulled the trigger. A single shot rang out, piercing the morning air. It struck Brian Thompson in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. In that instant, chaos erupted. People screamed and scattered, some rushing to help, while others stood frozen in shock, unable to comprehend the horror they had just witnessed. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, But it was already too late. Brian Thompson lay lifeless on the sidewalk, his dreams, ambitions, and life snuffed out in a moment of violence. Needle nod. The news of the shooting spread like wildfire through the city. By lunchtime, headlines blared from every news outlet. The CEO gunned down in broad daylight. The public was horrified. How could this happen? Who could commit such a crime in New York City, one of the most watched and secure places in the world? As the authorities scrambled to piece together the events of that fateful morning, a manhunt for Thompson's killer began. The question echoed in the minds of New Yorkers and people across the nation: why would a young, promising man like Luigi Mangione resort to such extreme measures? The shockwaves of this brutal act reached far beyond the bustling streets of Manhattan. It sparked outrage, fear, and a deep sense of unease. In a society where corporate executives often seemed untouchable, the murder of Brian Thompson shattered that illusion. People began to question the safety of their own lives and the hidden anger that simmered beneath the surface of corporate America. As the echoes of gunfire faded into the distance, the reality of the situation began to sink in. It was a crime that had stunned a city and sent shockwaves through an entire nation. The police were quick to respond, rushing to the scene of the shooting. Officers arrived within minutes, their sirens wailing, cutting through the chaos that had ensued on the busy Manhattan street. First responders focused on securing the area, ensuring that no one else was harmed. The sight was horrific. Brian Thompson lay motionless on the ground, and a crowd of horrified onlookers stood by, some crying, others in disbelief. Salisbury sidestepped them. Detectives swiftly cordoned off the area, expertly gathering evidence from the crime scene. They meticulously scoured the vicinity for anything that could help them piece together the events of that fateful morning. But as they began their investigation, one question loomed large. Who would want to kill a man like Brian Thompson? The detectives turned their attention to the security footage from nearby cameras. They reviewed the clips over and over, looking for any sign of the shooter. As they combed through the recordings, they saw Brian leaving the hotel, unaware of the danger that lurked just moments away. Then, in a blur, they caught a glimpse of a figure, someone standing in the shadows, someone opportunist, someone who saw a word. But it was what came next that would change everything. As detectives continued their search, they discovered crucial pieces of evidence. A water bottle and a protein bar were found discarded near the crime scene. At first glance, they seemed insignificant, just items that could belong to anyone. But when forensic teams analyzed them, they uncovered something alarming. Luigi Mangione's fingerprints. The detectives' hearts raced. They had a name, and with it, a potential suspect. This wasn't just a random act of violence, it was a targeted assassination, and they now had a lead that could unravel the entire case. Travis pulled his gloves off, stepped back, and pressed the gavel. Witnesses were interviewed, and as stories began to flow in, a clearer picture emerged. Some described seeing a young man with a determined look lingering near the hotel entrance before the shot was fired. Others recalled hearing strange murmurs about corporate greed and healthcare that seemed out of place for a busy morning in the city. The detectives pieced together the information, and with each passing moment, the mystery started to unfold. Could it be that Luigi Mangione, a young man with a bright future, had turned into a killer driven by anger and disillusionment? As the investigation deepened, the detectives knew they were on the verge of uncovering a motive that could explain this shocking crime. But would they be able to find Mangione before he disappeared into the shadows again? The clock was ticking, and the city held its breath, waiting for answers. The aftermath of Brian Thompson's murder sent shockwaves across the country. In the days that followed, a massive manhunt for Luigi Mangione unfolded. Law enforcement agencies from local police to the FBI were mobilized, pooling their resources to track down the young man who had turned into a national fugitive. They were restless to find For nearly a week, the search was intense. Every lead was followed, every tip investigated. Authorities scoured surveillance footage, piecing together Mangione's movements after the crime. They learned that he had fled the scene in a panic, but where did he go next? As the investigation progressed, the public became increasingly involved. News reports captured the nation's attention, and social media buzzed with speculation. Pictures of Mangione were shared widely, and the hashtag #FindLuigi began to trend. Citizens were urged to remain vigilant and report any sightings. The public's role in identifying the suspect was crucial, and people were eager to help. Tips began to pour in from all corners of the country. Some claimed to have spotted him in New Jersey, others thought they had seen him in Pennsylvania. But the elusive Mangione remained one step ahead, moving swiftly and carefully, as if he were a ghost slipping through the shadows. As days turned into a week, the pressure mounted. Law enforcement officials knew they needed to act quickly before Mangione disappeared for good. Then, just when it seemed like he might vanish forever, luck turned against him in the most unexpected place. December 11, 2024, Luigi Mangione was spotted at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania. He had chosen an unsuspecting location where he thought he could blend in with the crowd. But the eyes of the nation were upon him. A sharp-eyed employee recognized him from the news and alerted the authorities. Within minutes, police surrounded the fast food restaurant. Officers approached cautiously, their hearts racing with anticipation. This was it. After a week of chasing a phantom, they had finally tracked down their suspect. As they took him into custody, they discovered items that would shock the public even further. Among his belongings, they found a fake ID, allowing him to conceal his identity. But even more alarming was the 3D printed gun and a silencer, evidence of the premeditated nature of his crime and his willingness to evade detection at all costs. Luigi Mangione's luck had finally run out. The man who had evaded capture for a week was now in custody. But the questions remained. What drove him to commit such a shocking act, and what would be the consequences of his actions? As the authorities prepared to transport him back to New York, the nation held its breath, waiting for answers to the mystery that had captivated them all. And like all hidden truths, the story of the Nazis lives on. As investigators delved into the life of Luigi Mangione, they began to piece together a disturbing portrait of a man consumed by anger and resentment. What drove this once promising Ivy League graduate to commit such a heinous act? Digging deeper, they uncovered a notebook filled with his thoughts, ideas, and frustrations, a manifesto that would illuminate the dark motivations behind his actions. The pages of Mangione's notebook were filled with scrawled notes and angry rants directed at the very system he had once been a part of. He expressed a profound disdain for corporate America and the healthcare industry. He wrote passionately about how he believed these institutions prioritized profits over people, leaving countless individuals suffering and in need of care. Luigi's writings revealed a mind in turmoil, grappling with the harsh realities of a system he felt exploited the vulnerable. He lamented the many stories of patients who were denied treatment due to insurance policies, stories that haunted him and fueled his anger. This was not just an abstract frustration for him, it was personal. Speculation arose regarding whether Mangione had experienced a personal injury or had a family member who suffered due to the failings of the healthcare system. While he never publicly shared his personal grievances, it was clear that his anger stemmed from a deep-seated belief that the system was rigged against those who needed help the most. As the investigation advanced, public perception began to shift. Many people expressed a strange sense of sympathy for Mangione. Online forums buzzed with discussions about his motivations, some even labeling him a misunderstood anti-hero fighting against corporate greed. Supporters began to emerge, claiming that Mangione's actions, while extreme, were a reaction to a broken system. This public response only complicated the narrative. While some condemned his actions outright, others found themselves drawn to his plight, believing he was a victim of circumstances beyond his control. They argued that his crime was a desperate cry for help, a manifestation of the frustrations that many felt but did not act upon. As investigators continued to sift through Mangione's writings, they began to understand that the man they were dealing with was not just a killer, but a complex individual wrestling with his ideals, his anger, and his sense of justice. With each entry they read, the questions grew louder. Could this tragedy have been avoided? What could have driven a young man, gifted and intelligent, to such a dark place? In the end, the investigation revealed not just a killer, but a man who had become a symbol of the deep fractures in America's healthcare system. A system that many felt was in desperate need of reform. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that Mangione's story was not just about one man's crime, but about a societal issue that resonated with so many. Luigi Mangione's arrest marked the beginning of a tumultuous chapter, one that would enthrall the nation and spark intense debates about justice, mental health, and the American dream. As the dust settled from the shocking murder of Brian Thompson, the legal proceedings began to take shape. In the days following his capture, charges were filed against Mangione, including first-degree murder, possession of an unregistered firearm, and use of a firearm in the commission of a violent crime. The gravity of these charges weighed heavily on him, as he faced the prospect of spending the rest of his life behind bars. However, the path to trial was anything but straightforward. Mangione's defense team quickly realized that they were entering a complex battlefield. They fought an extradition battle to bring him back from Pennsylvania to New York, where the crime had taken place. The legal wrangling was intense, with lawyers arguing over jurisdiction and the implications of his action. As the case gained media attention, it became clear that public interest was soaring. News outlets covered every detail of the proceedings, from the evidence collected at the scene to the emotional testimonies of witnesses. The courtroom became a battleground for opinions, with many seeing Mangione as a misguided individual who had been pushed to the brink by a broken healthcare system, while others viewed him solely as a cold-blooded killer who deserved the harshest punishment. The defense team faced an uphill struggle as they worked to challenge the evidence against Mangione. They argued that his mental state at the time of the crime should be taken into account. They sought to portray him not just as a murderer, but as a victim of circumstances, someone who had been overwhelmed by his anger and frustration with the healthcare industry. Despite their efforts, the prosecution remained steadfast, presenting a case built on the facts. They highlighted the premeditated nature of the crime, emphasizing the 3D printed gun and the meticulous planning that had gone into the assassination of Brian Thompson. The prosecution aimed to paint a picture of a man who had made a conscious choice to end another's life, a choice that could not be excused or justified. As the trial date approached, the atmosphere grew increasingly charged. The case drew in experts, advocates, and commentators who weighed in on the broader implications of Mangione's actions. Discussions about healthcare reform and corporate responsibility surged, forcing society to confront the uncomfortable truths behind the system. With each passing day, the drama unfolded, capturing the attention of viewers across the nation, who were eager to see how the legal system would respond to a case that blurred the lines between justice and societal failure. Luigi Mangione's arrest was just the beginning. What followed was a legal battle that not only defined his fate, but also raised profound questions about the very fabric of American society. Would justice prevail? Or would the complexities of a broken system lead to a verdict that left everyone feeling unsatisfied? The aftermath of Luigi Mangione's actions sent shockwaves far beyond the streets of Manhattan or the walls of the courtroom. This was not just the story of one man's crime or one victim's tragic death. It was the story of an entire system thrown under the microscope, a system that many believed had failed, not just Mangione, but millions of Americans who relied on it. In corporate America, fear rippled through boardrooms and executive offices. Brian Thompson's assassination was not merely seen as a random act of violence, but as a targeted attack on the upper echelons of the business world. Executives across industries began to ask themselves unsettling questions. Could this happen to me? Am I safe? Companies scrambled to bolster their security measures. CEOs and high-ranking officials, once accustomed to moving freely through public spaces, now traveled with armed escorts and heightened surveillance. Corporate offices installed advanced security systems, and business travel protocols were revised. The murder of Brian Thompson had shattered the illusion of invincibility that many in positions of power had taken for granted. But while the business world reacted with fear, the public responded with debate. Mangione's case ignited a nationwide conversation about healthcare reform and corporate responsibility. Questions that had long simmered beneath the surface now boiled over into the public sphere. Why had the healthcare system become so unaffordable, so inaccessible, that it could drive someone to such extremes? Why did corporate executives earn millions while ordinary people struggled to pay for basic medical care? And most importantly, had the system created a deep, festering resentment that could no longer be ignored? For some, Luigi Mangione became a symbol of this resentment. Online forums and social media platforms buzzed with discussion. Some viewed him as a villain, a man who had taken a life in cold blood and deserved to face the harshest punishment. Others, however, saw him as a tragic figure, a man who had cracked under the weight of a system that many believed was broken. The debates were polarizing. To some, Mangione's actions were unjustifiable, no matter the circumstances. But to others, he was an anti-hero, a figure who exposed the flaws and greed of the healthcare industry in the most brutal way imaginable. The healthcare industry itself was not immune to the ripple effects of this tragedy. Public perception of the industry, already fragile, took another hit. Critics pointed to the crime as evidence of a system that prioritized profits over people, a system that had created a dangerous divide between those at the top and those who felt powerless at the bottom. In response, some healthcare companies attempted to repair their public image. They pledged to increase transparency, reduce costs, and focus on patient care. But for many Americans, these promises felt hollow. Too little, too late. The damage had been done, and the murder of Brian Thompson had left an indelible mark on how the public viewed healthcare in America. The long-term effects were profound. Corporate leaders became more aware of how their decisions impacted society at large. The healthcare debate intensified, with reform advocates pointing to Mangione's case as a grim reminder of the stakes involved. And for ordinary people, the story served as a chilling reflection of their own frustrations and struggles, a reminder that beneath the surface of one man's crime lay issues that affected millions. The ripple effects of Luigi Mangione's actions spread far beyond the courtroom. They reached into boardrooms, hospitals, and homes across the country, forcing a nation to confront uncomfortable truths about power, inequality, and the cost of maintaining a broken system. Luigi Mangione was the first of several world-famous people to be imprisoned in the country. This was not just the story of a murder. It was the story of a nation grappling with its own identity, a nation torn between outrage, fear, and the desperate hope for something better. As Luigi Mangione sits in a holding cell awaiting the trial that will determine his fate, the rest of us are left to grapple with the many uncomfortable questions his story raises. What drove a man, born into privilege and educated at the highest levels, to take such a drastic and violent path? Was he simply a cold-blooded killer, someone who meticulously planned an assassination and executed it with precision? Or was he, as some have claimed, a misguided crusader, driven to the edge by a system he believed was broken beyond repair? Experts have weighed in, adding layers of complexity to an already tangled narrative. Psychologists have pointed to the pressure cooker of modern life, where unresolved anger and personal struggles can fester until they erupt in shocking ways. Some argue that Mangione's carefully orchestrated attack reveals not just his intelligence, but his profound sense of disillusionment, a man whose brilliance was overshadowed by his inability to cope with the injustices he saw around him. Legal scholars, on the other hand, have posed chilling questions about the nature of his actions. Was Mangione a vigilante, striking out against a system that he believed had failed millions of people? Or was he a domestic terrorist, using violence to send a message and instill fear? The fine line between vigilantism and terrorism has never been so blurred, with Mangione's case forcing the nation to confront its own definitions of justice, morality, and the consequences of unchecked anger. And then there's the role of social media. In the digital age, the court of public opinion often moves faster than the legal system itself. Within hours of the shooting, Luigi Mangione's name and image were plastered across every news outlet, his life dissected by strangers in real time. Online, the responses were as divided as the nation itself, flaring to fervor in subtle ways and turning one sky a terminal day. Some called him a monster, a man who had taken an innocent life and destroyed countless others in the process. Others, however, saw him as a tragic figure, a man who had given voice, albeit through violence, to the frustrations so many felt but were too afraid to express. Hashtags, petitions, and debates erupted online, shaping public perception of Mangione before his trial even began. In many ways, social media became the unofficial jury, with its verdict shifting day by day, post by post. But perhaps the most haunting question of all is what Luigi Mangione's story reveals about the state of the American dream. Here was a man who, by all accounts, had every advantage in life: wealth, education, opportunity. Yet somewhere along the way, he became consumed by anger and disillusionment, believing that the system was so broken, so corrupt, that the only way to fight back was through violence. What does his story say about a society where even the most privileged individuals feel powerless? What does it reveal about a system where healthcare, a basic human need, has become a battleground for profit and greed? And what happens when that frustration boils over, turning anger into action and action into tragedy? As we reflect on the events that led up to Brian Thompson's murder, we are left with more questions than answers. Was this a one-off act of desperation, or a symptom of something much larger? A deeper fracture in our society that can no longer be ignored. Luigi Mangione's story forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths. It asks us to look inward, to examine the systems we've built, and to question whether they serve the people they were meant to protect, or whether they've created a world where violence becomes the language of the unheard. As the trial looms on the horizon, the world watches, waiting for justice. But justice, in a case like this, is not so easily defined. Is it punishment for a man who took a life, or is it accountability for a system that pushed him to the edge? For now we are left with the story of Luigi Mangione, a story that is both uniquely his and painfully familiar. A story that reveals the darker corners of the American dream, and the lengths to which some will go when they feel there is no other way to be heard. The debates surrounding his actions force us to confront uncomfortable truths about the inequalities in our society, the growing divide between those who have power and those who feel powerless. But the question remains, was Mangione simply a cold-blooded killer? Or was he a man pushed to the brink by a system that left him and so many others feeling abandoned? As we await the final verdict, one thing is clear. The story of Luigi Mangione isn't just his own. It is a reflection of a society struggling with its own identity, caught between the promise of the American dream and the harsh reality of inequality and corporate greed. What do you think? Was Mangione a victim of the system, or is he simply a product of his own choices? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as thought-provoking as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping true crime stories that explore the darkest corners of human behavior.